Did you ever wish there was a cheat code for editing that allowed you to edit like a pro without being an expert? Well, that cheat code exists and is called the Pro Panel. It's a plugin that's being used by over 20,000 photographers around the world to edit like a pro without being experts in Photoshop. The Pro Panel puts all the most powerful features in Photoshop at your fingertips instead of being hidden behind different menus. It also automates multi-step complex tasks with one click. I'm going to show you guys just how easy it is to edit your photos in Photoshop using the Pro Panel. Alright, so I have this beautiful sunset image from the Faroe Islands open up in Photoshop, and you can see this is the raw adjusted file. So if I turn that off, you can see the original raw file here. And basically I just bumped up the exposure and the shadows a little bit, brought the highlights down a touch to recover the highlights, and also applied the profile corrections. So we're going to do all the heavy lifting in Photoshop with the Pro Panel now, and I'm going to show you guys just how easy it is. So the first thing that I notice in the image is that the sky is still a little bright and washed out. So if I go over here to the filters section, I can apply the darken highlights filter, and that's just going to darken the brighter part of the photo and bring back some of the color and detail there. And I can actually run that twice if I want to get a stronger effect. And I can always turn down the opacity of each individual layer or adjustment to lower the strength or visibility of the adjustment. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to correct for the shadows because they still look a little dark compared to the rest of the photo. So I could create a shadows luminosity mask, something like shadows 2. And I could apply that directly as an adjustment like a curves layer. And just bump the shadows up and not affect any other area except for the shadows in the image. Additionally, I could also create another luminosity mask from the highlights, something like highlights 2. And I could apply that as a group in a mask. And the cool thing about applying a luminosity mask as a group in a mask is now we have a group with a luminosity mask attached to it. And any adjustments that we create now within that group are only shown in the areas that we targeted with a luminosity mask. So for example, if I create a curves layer here and just bring down the brightness here, it's only gonna bring the brightness down in the highlights again. I could also target the color, maybe warm it up with a warming photo filter, or add a color balance layer additionally, and maybe bump the reds up and the yellows up in the highlights just a little bit. And if I turn that group off and on, you can see we've just targeted just the highlights in the photo with some color and brightness effects. So let's go back to filters, and I'm going to actually click on the auto color just to see if there's any color cast in the photo. And it's basically picking up a little bit of a red color cast here, but I do actually like a little bit of the red, so I can just lower the opacity of the auto color filter here to where I want it, maybe something like 25%, and that just got rid of a little bit of that red, but still kept some of that warm tone that we had created. Next, I want to add a vignette, but a custom vignette. So if I add a standard vignette, it's going to darken the perimeters of the whole photo, and it's going to darken those shadows again in the areas that we just brighten them up. So if I create a custom vignette, I can grab a selection tool like the lasso tool, and I can actually define exactly where I want the vignette to be applied. So I can avoid some of the shadow areas and not darken them any further. Now if I click custom vignette, it's going to create a nice custom vignette shape for us. And I can even click duplicate and double the strength of that vignette filter up. And again, I can always just turn the opacity down on one or both of those layers to lessen the strength of the effect. All right, next I'm going to add the Vivid One filter, and that just adds a nice bit of pop of color and contrast to the photo. If I turn that off and on, you can see. And I'm actually going to go back to the effects panel here and then add that warming photo filter globally to the entire image now, just to give it a little bit more of that sunset feel. And I'm going to bring the strength of the opacity down just a little, just something like 65%. All right, so the Pro Panel does some really cool things as well, like automate multi-step or multi-keyboard shortcut tasks. One of my favorite filters is the Orton filter, and I also like high-pass sharpening. So the Orton filter will give your photo a nice ethereal glow and kind of dreamy look, but it's a blurring effect and you do lose some detail in the process. So the beautiful thing about the Orton Sharp filter is it will actually do the Orton filter plus some sharpening at the same time, so you actually wind up with more detail than when you started. And I can actually expand that Orton Sharp group and bring the strength of the Orton effect down, or the sharpening down or up individually if I want to. So I'm just going to lower the strength of those just a bit. And if I zoom in, you can see we've applied this Orton Sharp effect, and we actually wind up with that Orton effect, but even more detail than when we first started. Turn that off and on, you can see the Orton effect just kind of adds a nice kind of dreamy look to the photo. You see this in a lot of landscape shots. All right, so we could even stamp visible with one click, as where normally that would be Command Option Shift and E for the keyboard shortcut on a Mac, or Control Alt Shift and E on a PC. So I'm going to click Stamp Visible, and we can open up the photo in Camera Raw directly from the Pro Panel, also with one click. And I can make a couple quick adjustments to the photo, just some final touches before saving, something like that. And if I turn off everything except for the raw adjusted file we started with, you can see we started here and wound up with this really beautifully edited, balanced, and color corrected sunset photo. And if we turn off everything except for the raw, this is the original file here and the final edit. So in addition to the editing aspect, we can actually do some quick functions to speed our workflow up inside Photoshop as well. For example, I could add my watermark and designate it maybe to the top right corner here. And I could quickly resize or move that as well by clicking the transform tool and resizing that to where I want it. And I can even change the opacity of that directly in the layer. And then we could save this quickly as a full resolution JPEG or a Photoshop file or a large document file to a designated folder that we have selected. And I can also save it for web very quickly at the designated pixel length that I choose, just by typing that in here and clicking JPEG. So now we have our final image with the watermark sized for web and ready to share online. And that's it. You can see it's super easy to use the Pro Panel in Photoshop without being an expert. I put a link for the website below in the video description if you want to check out the plugin, and if you have any questions, you can leave a comment below or shoot me an email to the website.